If we want to be serious about quality, it is time to get tired of finding bugs and start preventing their happening in the first place. When you implement different features, fixing bugs, or even refactoring, there is a chance that we will break something. We often find these problems in either our manual testing or in production, where the latter is pretty bad. So to explain testing in Flutter, we'll break it down in 3 different categories, starting with unit testing. Unit testing tests a single method, function, or class. The goal of unit testing is to verify our units of logic in a variety of different conditions. But instead of showing arbitrary examples, let's see how we can implement it in our own application. I've gone ahead and created a new class. This is a user class where we extend change notifier, and we have 3 different getters, one for the age, one for the name, and one for if we are old or not. And on this class we have 2 very important methods, one for birthday and one for changing the name. And now we can use unit testing to actually test this behavior. If we right click on our file and go to test, we will get this pop-up with creating the actual test. Now VS Code actually defaults to widget testing, so we will switch that out for a normal unit testing. By replacing test widgets with test and also removing the parameter, we actually have a unit test instead. Now naming tests is a bit different than actually naming methods. And there are a bunch of different ways how you can give good namings to your tests. I usually go with given when then. So in this case it can be given user with age 24, when birthday is called, then user is old. Now the naming gives a good indication of what this unit test actually will check. So before we can test any user, we have to initialize our user object. And as our test name specifies, we're going to give our user a age of 24. And we're not really going to care about the name in this test. Also, of course, don't forget to import the user class. Now to make this easier to follow, we can arrange this in 3 different categories. The first one being arrange, the second one being act, and the third one being assert. In arrange, we set up everything that's going to be used by the test. In act, we're going to call the specific method or do the change that we want to test on. This case being the birthday, changing the age to 25. And in assert, we're going to check our values. We're going to use the expect method. This will let us pass in first the value that it actually is, and then the second value, which is the value we expect. So the value it actually is the user's age, and the one we are expecting is age 25. And now we can actually go ahead and run the test. In VS Code, it will open the debug console, and in the left side you can see the test tab. Here we can see the actual test running, and if we would open that, we can see the actual specific test. Now when our test passes, we get a green check mark, but if it would fail, we will get a red one with a debug console explaining. One crucial thing you have to know about testing is mocks, which is about replacing dependencies. I won't go too deeply into this, but let's see an example. So first off, let's add our dependencies. Let's say our method now calls a API, and in this example we're going to use the DO package, and we will do a simple get method. Here you could replace your API, we will just type Google for the sake of it. Now every time this method runs, we'll do a get call to Google. Now the problem comes in unit testing, as the method we now want to test actually depend on internet connection. So the first problem is that we can't instantiate the dependency right in the method, because then we don't have any actual way of mocking that dependency. So if we go back to the class and just pass DO in the constructor, and then back in the test we can actually give it the DO client. But instead of giving it the DO client, we can actually create a mock of this DO client. We can do this with the following syntax. We can also decide what this DO client will do when we do a get call. So when we do a get call, we're going to force this mock to return something. As this is asynchronous, we'll use then answer, and the response will just be a response object. Now when we pass this mock to the constructor, we have full control of this dependency, which makes it completely testable. Now moving on to widget testing. I've gone ahead and changed up the counterexample using Riverpod. So I simply create a change notify provider with the user of age 24 and the name Greta. If you have never used Riverpod before, I recommend my Riverpod video, which will get you up to speed with that. You can find that video down in the description. So now we're just listening to that user provider, so we get that user, and every time that change, we just re-render this text. So in this case, we're going to see an example right here, what the application looks like. And when you click the floating action button, you will see that the age is incremented. Now moving on to the test file. This one is the auto-generated one with the counterexample. We will go ahead and remove everything in it and start by just changing the name. I'm going to go ahead and use the same naming convention as the unit test. So in this case, given, when, then. So in this case, the name will be given user in homepage when floating action button is pressed, then birthday is called. Now, one of the differences, if we look to the right of this test name, we can see that we actually get access to this tester property. The easiest way to think of this tester property is as the user. So we're going with the same structure as the unit test. In this case, we're going to create a comment for assemble. And the first thing we have to do is actually render the actual page. To do this, we can use the tester pump widget, which is an asynchronous function, so you have to await it. Here we will wrap it in a provider scope, as that is what RiverPod requires us to do. Then we have to provide a material app. And inside this material app, we can give it our homepage. So in this case, it's the actual widget that we want to widget test. So one more thing we have to do in the assemble step is actually find a button that we want to press. And we haven't used any keys, so we will find the floating action button by type. Just be aware that this will find the first one it finds, and we only have one, so that will just be that specific one. And now, of course, we're going to go to the act stage. And here we're actually going to tap the button. So using the tester, we can use the tap method. And we just pass in the button because that's the thing we want to tap on. After that, we want the widget tree to re-render, so we actually can get the changes. And that is what this pump method does. Moving to the assert section. And now we just have to find that text which we have incremented by 1 as we pressed on that button. So we can use find text. And the text we want to find is Greta age 25 because the default age is 24. Now we can create the expect method. And here we expect the text to be found. So the first argument is text and the second argument is finds one widget. That way we make sure that we find one widget which has Greta age 25 in the text. So if we go ahead and scroll up and just run that widget test, we should see that we get a green check mark. Now moving on to integration testing, we're going to start by adding another dev dependency, which will be Flutter driver. With this, we're able to do integration testing in Flutter. After that, we're going to create a new folder in the root of the application. This is going to have the name of test driver. Now we're going to specify two files inside here. The first one being app.dart and the second one being apptest.dart. So now if we go ahead and move to the app.dart file, we can start with the imports. We are first going to import the Flutter driver extension, and the second one being our main.dart file. Now this new main function is the one we're going to use in our driver or integration tests. We're going to start by calling the enable Flutter driver extension, which in simple terms lets the driver interact with the application. We're also going to go to the main import and import it as app. Now the syntax is a bit easier because we can now run app.main and then run the main function. Now we can actually go ahead and move to the app test file. This is the file that will actually contain all of the tests that we're going to run. We're going to start off by just importing Flutter driver and also import test. But as you can see now, the test is actually not imported properly, and that is because we have to add it to the YAML file. Now we can just import test in the dev dependency section in the YAML file. And this is the same as the other test. We're going to create a main function. We're also going to define a group. The group name I will just call Greta app. Now in top of the group, we can just define the button that we want to click. So the syntax is a bit different in the driver tests. We're going to use the find by type as we have done before in the widget test. But this one is actually just expecting a string, so we'll just give it a string instead. So first off, we have to declare our driver. After we have done that, we're going to have to define our setup all and teardown all. And in the setup all, we're actually going to initialize the driver by calling connect. This will connect the driver to the actual application. And now the teardown is actually very simple. We're going to define our teardown all, which is also a asynchronous function. And we're going to check if that the driver is not null. And if it's not null, we can just run close on the driver object. So now we're actually done with the actual setup of the tests. Now we can start to define what the test actually will do. I'm going to use the same naming convention here as I've used in the unit and widget testing. Now this test is actually already covered in the widget test, but we're just going to define it here as well to make it simple and more understandable. So we just define the name given app is run when clicking fab, then Greta is 25 years old. Now as we actually found a button up at the group, we can use that button down here in the test. So we're going to simply tap it, and when running integration tests we don't have to pump widgets and so on. We can just use this find text, and we expect it to now say Greta age 25. Now the syntax varies a bit, but we have the same expect function. But here we now have to await the driver get text. So we can get that value out of the text variable. And now we can just say that we expect to find Greta age 25. Now if we move over to app.dart, we can actually start the application. Now when the application has been started through this Flutter driver, we can go ahead and run the actual tests. So when I click run, you will see the test actually running and changing the application, and also testing and verify that the test result is expected. With this, you should be ready to dive into testing yourself. Just remember to take it slow and steady. It's better to start with something than nothing. If you like this video, consider checking out my Patreon. I provide a bunch of different perks, such as sneak peeks of my future videos. Other than that, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, and I will see you in the next one.